The title of this talk is Layers, Folds, and Semi-Neuronal Information Processing. We start with something called a metabrain model, and we have an archive preprint on this. And the idea is to have a model that's embodied, but also has these different layers of representational complexity. And so you can have a low-level representation like a neural network and a higher-level representation like a symbolic model. So these are similar to neurosymbolic models, but they're embodied. And so we can take this embodiment aspect and think about the biological analog, which is biological layering and folding. Now, this is a composite process that you see in a lot of different types of tissue in different animals across the tree of life. So you have the human brain, which has convolutions on the surface. You have skin, which has different layers of tissue that interact with each other. And you even have embryos and regenerative processes where different tissue type layers interact and change their shape and fold. So we can actually take inspiration from this to build a model where you have a layered metabrain of different layers, and then you can fold it in different ways. So you can mimic the folding aspects of developmental biology. You can form different things like guts or analogs of guts, and you can look at different aspects of the embodiment of this computational model. So you can fold it, and it brings different parts of the model in closer proximity to one another. Or you can capture different aspects of the environment. So you can do things like distributed array processing on different environmental signals. Now, we use the gut as an example of this. This is what we call a semi-neuronal system. So the gut is very complex. It has a lot of different types of tissues. It has neuronal connections with the peripheral nervous system, the central nervous system, with muscle, different cell populations doing other types of physiological things. You have interactions with the microbiome, and you have connections with the autonomic nervous system, hormonal systems, and so forth. So what kinds of computational representation are necessary to represent and embody such a system? Well, we can take our cues from different organisms. So if you go across the tree of life, there are different organisms with different types of gut-brain axes, and they have different configurations. But these configurations always involve some sort of folding and layering. So we can look at this as an integrated phenotype, and we can think about what needs to be represented to be functionally active in different organisms. So this is a form of what they call morphological computation. And so we can actually start with the development of these models. We can start with the development of the different layers where they emerge in development, and then go from there and put them together, and then start folding them to embody them. Now, we use a canalizing function to also mimic development. So we have our embryonic agent, and we have a connectionist encoding, which is something that we can put together into what we call a canalizing function. And these models evolve, or they develop rather, through this type of canalizing function where you have branch points at different points in development, and the models can diversify in different ways and have a flexible function. We focus specifically on this connectivity activation encoding, which we talked about at Neuromatch 3. This is where the connection, or the connectionist network, grows in size with development. So you can grow these in size and complexity, and then you can specialize them for different layers. But in this case, we can actually look in the gut at a model that has 3 different layers. So you have this lowest layer to highest layer of representation. So it's not enough just to throw a generic neural network in there. You want to have networks that grow through this connectivity encoding function, but also differentiate in different ways. And so we have the level A, which is basically like different layers of muscle that are connected. So it's similar to a muscular hydrostat that you would see in a marine organism. The second level of representation is this intermediate layer of neural network. It's a neural network embedding. It's very similar to a graph neural network. And this represents neuronal communication across the gut. And then C is the highest representational layer, and this is allostatic regulation. So this is really about regulating the overall state of the system in different ways. And so we can combine these, and they communicate with one another in a bottom-up and top-down fashion. And we can mimic the behavior of a gut, theoretically, or we can mimic the geometry of an organism and its gut. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of how we might use these types of techniques in agents. So the first example is topological remapping. And in this case, we have a brain case, which is scaled to the size of an agent's body. And we have a small brain case, which has a couple of neurons connected and a single layer. And then we can introduce this layering. So we have two layers, and then we can expand that model so that it expands out to a larger proportion of the body. And you can see here that this makes some difference in the performance of the agent, but also in the way it senses the world and interacts with its sensors and effectors. The second example is layering differentiation and structure. So we can get into this aspect of thinking about an agent as a developing organism from an egg, a single cell, a single type of sort of tissue or a unit, if you will, to a mature agent. And so we can differentiate different parts of the embodied agent, the internal model, the vehicle body, the sensors and effectors. And then we can actually look at its origins from a trypoplastic type model, which is common in developmental biology. And this can incorporate different computational models and different computational functions. The third example is allostatic regulation. So we have two different examples here. In this model here, which doesn't have a top layer, you observe reactive processing even as it folds. This is neuromuscular control and autonomic control or closed loop feedback. When you add in this third layer of allostatic regulation, you get interactive processing. This could be neuromuscular control, interoception, and an emotional circuit. So this encourages open loop feedback and a different type of behavior in the model. And of course, this continued folding actually isn't necessarily related to this, but it enables a better sort of embodiment of the model. So finally, we envision applications of soft robotics. So there are many opportunities to model different types of grips and hands and running and crawling and doing things with tentacles and grasping and all sorts of different things that we eventually would like to move towards. Thank you for your attention. And there's our preprint on the archive.